Madden 23 has been out for 4 months and it's been a wild ride to say the least. There's been some good, there's definitely been some bad, but how is the game playing right now, today, as of the recording of this video? With Christmas approaching in a few days, a lot of people will be getting the game for the first time, but also around this time of year is typically when a lot of older people will buy the game instead of doing it at the beginning of the year, because by now a lot of the problems have been ironed out and the game is cheaper. In fact, you can probably find the game for half off or close to it around holiday season. So all of the reviews from a few months ago aren't really relevant today. And a lot of the issues we've talked about over the past few months aren't relevant today either, because some of those don't exist anymore. So what is the state of Madden 23? What is the truth about Madden 23 4 months into the game? It's interesting because Operation Sports put out a post earlier today where they were talking about how they feel about the game at this point, and a lot of it was actually pretty positive. They said that it is the best Madden has played in a while after the numerous amounts of patches we've gotten, and while it still is not near perfect, it's actually in a pretty good state. Now, I found that interesting because my perspective is usually a little bit different as someone that covers the game every step of the way from every different viewpoint. I also play the game pretty significantly, so I might view the game differently than somebody else. But interestingly enough, this time of year is usually when each Madden game is at or near its best for that cycle, because all of the problems have been addressed and they're no longer there. So if you're picking up the game for the first time, you're actually going to get a much better experience than all of us that have been having to play through all of the troubles for the previous 4 months. Let's start with gameplay. Now, coming into Madden 23, gameplay was the biggest selling point that it's been in years. And a lot of that is probably because of the passing of John Madden. They wanted to try to clean up some of the issues that have plagued gameplay for years. They wanted to put some more investment into it, and they did just that. And it's probably the most noticeable change from last year to this year, mainly when you look at tackling. They added a ton of new animations. They cleaned up a lot of the existing animations. They made things more physics-based, although I'm using that term loosely because they could still be much more physics-based than they already are. But for Madden, and compared to the previous games, it's probably the biggest noticeable change. They also made some changes to defense that would help defend some of the pesky routes of years past, and during the beta period of the game before it officially released, it definitely was true. Defense actually played very well, and even when the game released, defense was still pretty strong, although not as good as the beta. And now that we've gone through a ton of updates and patches, defense doesn't quite feel nearly as good as it did at the beginning of the year. I don't know that it necessarily got worse or that people just figured out workarounds for some of the things that the defense was doing better, and we found different ways to abuse it. I think it's probably a little bit of both, but I would definitely not say the defense is a strong selling point of the gameplay like I did months ago when the game first launched. They also added a new passing mechanic on the next-gen version of the game, and it's still been kind of a toss-up all year. Some players love it, some people just opted not to use it. I think it's definitely worth using if you put your time into it, because you can definitely make better passes with the new skill-based passing, specifically with the freeform passing that allows you to aim the ball pretty much any exact spot on the field to lead it away from defenders. If you get good with this mechanic, it's actually super useful and does make the game better, but if it's too advanced for you, you don't have to use it, but you're definitely missing out on some of the bigger capabilities of the passing game. Now, in terms of the meta for online gamers, it's definitely another annoying year of the overpowered stuff online. This year, it's a lot of man blitzing. Man-to-man defense has been pretty solid all year. It just recently kind of took a step back with the last update, but man blitzes are still very much used, and the reason for this is because the one area of gameplay that has lacked all year and is still lacking is the offensive line. Now, they have made it a tad better with some of the post-launch updates, but overall, the offensive line still does a bad job at picking up blitzers, more so than in even some of these previous years, so you're going to see a lot of heavy blitzes, which can be annoying. On the flip side, on offense, on the newer gen consoles, aggressive catching one-on-one has become very overpowered this year, and some people might actually like that, but more hardcore gamers tend to not like it as much, so the online state of the game is definitely not the most fun at the moment. It's a lot of one-on-one aggressive catching, it's a lot of man blitzing, and there's a big lack of defense on top of all of this, which makes it feel like you're kind of helpless out there on defense if you don't get to the QB quick. Good players have kind of figured out how to score at will, which tends to happen later on in the year, so if you're getting the game and you're more of an offline player, you may be okay with the gameplay overall, but if you're an online player, it's gonna be kind of annoying to say the least. The balancing of abilities specifically for online is also something I think has gotten a little out of hand this year more than in previous years. This is more of an Ultimate Team issue where you can create whatever team you want and you can handpick the abilities you want to put on specific players. They took a bit of a different approach this year with releasing a lot of players that have discounted abilities, and because of this, it's really easy to stack the most popular abilities in the game, which make playing even more annoying. And they have not really balanced this all year, which I think has been kind of a misstep by them, because now it's really just creating a very annoying online environment, more so for Ultimate Team. You don't have to deal with this if you play regular online head-to-head because you cannot customize abilities, but for Ultimate Team, this is definitely something that is in need of balancing, and until they do it, it's going to be kind of a little bit of a negative to play online for Ultimate Team. Now let's jump over to franchise mode, which is a very interesting topic for Madden 23. Over the last couple of years in general, EA has finally started to give more love to franchise mode in terms of adding back old features that people have wanted. They've even overhauled some features and also added some new stuff. Now it's still a ways away from the glory days of the football games 20 plus years ago, which is very unfortunate because it's still missing things like a create a team, mini camp, and some other smaller things that should have been added by now. But over the last couple of years, it did get assistant coaches finally added back. It got skill trees for the coaches and the staff. It got an overhauled scouting system. This year, the biggest thing was they overhauled free agency to make it harder to sign the big name players. They gave players motivation so that they kind of had a life of their own and can choose which teams they wanted to sign to based on their specific motivations. They also gave players tags, or roles, I guess is a better way to describe it, which helps more in the simulation aspect of the mode, so that if you have a franchise quarterback, for example, a team wouldn't be going ahead and drafting another young QB. But the biggest issue with franchise mode has been the bugs. While they're finally getting features added back, the last couple of years it has experienced more bugs, and this year was probably the buggiest yet. There were a lot of times where franchise modes would reset and start over, or they would go backwards a certain number of weeks. There were also issues with a lot of the online cloud franchises where teams could not advance, or franchises as a whole couldn't advance, or they'd restart. Or for 32-man leagues, a lot of leagues were not able to add the 32nd member, and there was just a slew of these problems that were disconnecting people, kicking them out, kicking them backwards, and everything you can think of. So if you got this game 4 months ago, you've experienced a lot of troubles with franchise mode. You've experienced a roller coaster. You've seen things not work and then get fixed for a week or two only to not work again. But interestingly enough, if you had to ask me right now, today, as of the recording of this video, how is franchise mode playing? Probably the best that it's played all year. It's actually probably at least decent or even good right now today, but who's to say in a week that there won't be another issue? That's the problem. And this is something that even Operation Sports touched on in their post, where they said they feel like Madden 23 is actually playing well right now. Gameplay, franchise mode, after the updates, right now, this is as good as Madden has played in a while. And if you look at the game from an overall scope, that is probably true right now, but the last 4 months still happened. So if you've been playing for the last 4 months, you probably have a much different outlook on Madden 23 versus somebody that might be playing it for the first time in the next few days. They might actually get a pretty good experience for the next few months until the new game comes out. Again, that is assuming that no other issues happen, and with EA, we just can't safely assume that anymore because there's just been so many issues. But typically, this is about the time of year where Madden at least gets to its best state. Does that still make it a good game? Not necessarily, but it's going to be the best version of that year's game because they finally fixed all of the major issues, and now the minor things that still exist might be annoying, but you shouldn't have to deal with anything as bad as just completely having a franchise mode start over, or having some of these crazy gameplay bugs like the one earlier this year where there was a way to make the QB unrecognizable by the defense. Yes, that really happened. All of those things are gone from the game right now, and the game is actually overall playing pretty solid. I still think the gameplay is kind of a toss-up for me. I see a lot more issues with the gameplay than maybe the average player does because I play online a lot, so I see all of the things that get abused. I see all of the metas. I see the things that have been kind of ignored, for maybe lack of a better term, this year in terms of balancing, and there still is more balancing likely to come with the next update or two, which could actually take gameplay up a notch. But I think if I'm comparing it to the previous few years, the gameplay is still pretty solid compared to those games, although if I'm looking at gameplay as a whole, I think it still definitely has a ways to go. In terms of the other modes like Face of the Franchise, Superstar KO, and the Yard, not really much has changed with those this year. There are still modes that people play, although it feels like they've kind of fallen more by the wayside. Face of the franchise had some issues much like regular franchise mode at the beginning of the year, but they've finally ironed those out as well. I just don't think there's a ton of depth in Face of the franchise. If it's something you like to play and you liked the previous versions, you'll probably still like this version, but if you found that the previous versions were lacking, you're gonna feel the same way about this version. In terms of Superstar KO in the Yard, they're little fun side things to play, but it feels like they've kind of been stripped a little bit from the previous years, and they just don't offer anything new that you haven't already experienced yet. All in all, Madden 23 is playing pretty solid right now, about as good as a Madden game has played recently. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that there's no big issues the rest of the way. And while you're here, some of you might not know that there's actually a new NCAA football game that's going to be coming out really soon, and if you want some more info on that, you can check out this video right here on the screen.